March 14th, 2017. It was just past 9 in the morning and Ozzy Osbourne quietly slipped out the back door of his Beverly Hills mansion. He knew Sharon was at her yoga class every Tuesday until 10. He knew his driver Antonio had the day off. The 68-year-old rock legend wasn't sneaking out that morning because he wanted to go to a bar or because he'd had a fight with Sharon. Ozzy Osbourne's problem was much simpler. He wanted to get a haircut, at a normal place, like a normal person. He could count on one hand the people who had touched his hair in the last 30 years. Sharon herself, or the most expensive stylist in Beverly Hills that she'd arranged, who charged $900 an hour. The man brought an assistant, a lighting guy, and a hair therapist with him every visit. Hair therapist. Ozzy wanted to swear every time he heard the term. Last week, when stylist Antoine came, he'd rubbed lavender oil into Ozzy's hair while cutting it, placed a crystal stone on his forehead and said, "I'm balancing your energy flow, Mr. Osbourne." That night, Ozzy had said to Sharon, "Sharon, that man was purifying my soul instead of cutting my hair. Next time, invite a priest, too." Sharon had laughed, but still booked Antoine for the following Tuesday. That's why Ozzy that morning, with an old Dodgers cap pulled over his head, wearing a faded black t-shirt and ripped jeans, had chosen the least flashy car in Sharon's collection, a grey Toyota Camry, and driven off. Gripping the steering wheel with his Parkinson's trembling hands, he drove in a random direction instead of typing "barbershop near me" into the GPS. He left the polished streets of Beverly Hills behind and headed south toward Van Nuys. 30 minutes later, he stopped at a sign he spotted on Van Owen Street. Ray's Barbershop, haircuts $18, walk-ins welcome. The neon in the R of the sign wasn't working. On the window there was a yellowed "We Support Our Troops" sticker, and below it a faded American flag sticker. As Ozzy got out of the car, he lowered his sunglasses to the tip of his nose and peered inside the shop. 2 barber chairs, one with torn leather patched up with tape, 3 plastic chairs in the waiting area, and an old Dodgers poster on the wall. Perfect. Exactly the kind of place he wanted. When he stepped inside, the little bell on the door jingled. The shop was empty. Not a single customer. Behind the counter, slumped in one of the waiting chairs, a man was muttering to himself with a piece of paper in his hand. Mid-50s, thick mustache, shoulders hunched, dark circles carved by sleeplessness under his eyes. He wore an old but clean barber's apron and worn-out sneakers on his feet. When the man noticed Ozzy, he quickly stuffed the paper into his pocket, as if he'd been caught, and stood up. "Morning, sir. Come on in, take a seat," he said with a forced smile. His voice was tired but professional. Ozzy took off his cap. Long brown hair spilled down to his shoulders. The barber looked at the hair, then at Ozzy's face, then back at the hair. There was no sign of recognition, just a professional assessment. "Long hair, huh? You want a trim or a real cut?" Ozzy sat down in the chair. "Just a trim, mate," he said. "Don't take too much off. My wife will notice." The barber laughed. "They always notice, don't they? My wife can tell if I cut 1 inch too much. She's got eyes like a hawk." The man unfolded a cape and draped it over Ozzy's shoulders. When he brought his hands to Ozzy's hair, he paused for a moment. "You got great hair for your age, sir. Thick. Most guys your age, they're praying for what you got." Ozzy looked at the man through the mirror. "What's your name, mate?" Ray Delgado. This is my shop. 22 years now." Ray picked up his scissors and got to work. His hands were steady, his movements economical. With each cut, strands of hair fell onto the cape. From an old radio in the corner of the shop, a classic rock song was playing. Fleetwood Mac's "Go Your Own Way" had just ended, and a commercial break had started. "You from around here?" Ray asked, clicking his scissors. "Originally? No," Ozzy said. "Birmingham, England." Ray raised his eyebrows. "Long way from home." Ozzy shrugged. "You could say that." The commercial break ended, and a familiar guitar riff rose from the radio. Just 4 notes, but 4 notes that billions of people around the world would recognize. That history-making riff from Tony Iommi's Fingers. "Paranoid." Ray's face lit up. "Oh man, I love this song," he said, setting down his scissors for a moment to turn up the volume. "Black Sabbath. You know Black Sabbath?" Ozzy looked at Ray through the mirror, and a small smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "I've heard of them," he said calmly. "Heard of them. Man, they're legends," Ray said, getting back to work with his scissors. "The singer, Ozzy Osbourne. That guy's crazy. You know what he did once?" Ozzy leaned forward slightly, as if deeply curious. "No, what did he do?" Ray's eyes went wide. "He bit the head off a bat, a real live bat, on stage in front of thousands of people. Can you believe that?" Ozzy nodded with a serious expression. That's quite something. Was the bat okay?" Ray burst out laughing. "Was the bat okay? Man, you're funny. No, the bat was not okay." Ray continued. He worked the scissors with one hand while making gestures in the air with the other. "And you know what else? That guy, I heard this from a buddy who worked at a venue. He once released 300 doves on stage, and they all flew into the audience. Women were screaming, guys were ducking. It was complete chaos." Ozzy had never heard this story, because it had never happened. But Ray's way of telling it was so vivid that Ozzy almost thought, "I wish I had." 300, you say?" Ozzy said, raising his eyebrows. "At least, maybe more. The guy's a maniac, but you know what?" Ray set down his scissors and looked at Ozzy through the mirror, his voice lowered, as if sharing a secret. "He's also got the best voice in rock. People think he's just crazy, but that man can sing. Changes. You ever heard that song? He sings it with his daughter. Makes me cry every time." Ray's eyes drifted into the distance for a moment. "My daughter used to sing. Before she—" He didn't finish the sentence. He picked up his scissors and went back to cutting. Silence fell over the shop. On the radio, Paranoid had long since ended, and Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven had started. Ozzy watched Ray's face through the mirror. With 40 years of stage experience, he knew when a person needed silence and when they needed someone to listen. "Your daughter," he said softly. "She stopped singing?" But before Ozzy could get an answer to that question, the bell on the shop door jingled once more. And the person who walked in was about to change the course of that morning, and perhaps of Ray Delgado's entire life. The man who came through the door was in his late 20s, with long black hair, arms covered in tattoos, wearing a faded Iron Maiden t-shirt. When he stepped inside, he looked at Ray first, then at the customer in the chair. He stopped, then took another step, stopped again. His eyes narrowed, his lips parted. Then that expression came. The expression Ozzy had seen on thousands of faces over 40 years. Shock, disbelief, and then a wild rush of joy. "There it goes," Ozzy thought to himself. "Good times never last." The man opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He pointed at the chair, then at Ozzy, then at the mirror on the wall, as if he thought one of the three wasn't real and was trying to figure out which one. "Dude," he finally said, his voice somewhere between a whisper and a shout. "Dude, you're—" Ozzy raised a finger to his lips. A universal sign. Quiet. The man froze. His eyes met Ozzy's, and in that finger, in that look, there was the authority of a man who had managed thousands of unexpected moments on hundreds of thousands of concert stages. The young metalhead nodded. He'd got the message. But his body hadn't. His knees were shaking and his eyes were still wide as plates. Ray hadn't noticed a thing. His back was to the door, and he was busy with the back of Ozzy's hair. "Take a seat, brother. I'll be with you in 10 minutes, he said without looking over his shoulder. The young man, whose name, as would later be learned, was Cody, collapsed into the waiting chair, his legs barely carrying him. Ozzy winked at him through the mirror. A smile appeared on Cody's face. Ray, meanwhile, was still talking. Scissors clicking, hair falling, stories flowing. Where was I? Oh yeah. So this Ozzy guy, the craziest thing about him isn't the bat or the doves or any of that stuff. The craziest thing is that he's still alive. The man has done every drug known to science. I read somewhere that doctors studied his DNA and found out he's literally a genetic mutant. His body processes toxins different from normal people. This was actually true. His DNA really had been studied in 2010. Ozzy smiled slightly. A mutant? Like the X-Men? Ray burst out laughing. Exactly like the X-Men. The guy should wear a cape. Cody was barely holding himself together in the waiting chair. He was biting his lips, looking at his phone, then looking back at Ozzy. His fingers hovered over his phone, probably dying to take a photo, but the weight of Ozzy's single finger gesture was still on him. Ray set down his scissors for a moment and tilted Ozzy's head slightly to check the hair. "Looking good, sir. You know what? You actually look a little like him." Ozzy's heart stopped for a second. Cody leaned forward in the waiting chair. "Like who?" Ozzy said, his voice as neutral as possible. "Like Ozzy Osbourne. I mean, if he was, older and more normal-looking." Ozzy raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "I'll take that as a compliment, I think." Ray laughed. "It is a compliment, trust me. That guy might be crazy, but the women love him." Cody let out a sound through his nose from the waiting chair, half laugh, half choking. Ray picked up his razor and started cleaning up Ozzy's neckline. Then he spoke, but his voice was different this time. Low, tired, as if talking to himself. "You know, sir, I almost didn't open the shop today." Ozzy asked. "Why not?" Ray paused for a moment. Their eyes met in the mirror. "Rent's due Friday. I'm 4 months behind. Landlord says this is the last chance. After Friday, he changes the locks." Ozzy listened in silence. Ray continued, as if now that he'd started talking, stopping was no longer possible. 22 years, man. 22 years in this chair. I've cut hair for construction workers, lawyers, cops, kids before their first day of school. I was here through the '94 earthquake, through the recession, and now some guy in a suit is going to take it all away because I can't come up with $11,000. $11,000. Something broke inside Ozzy when he heard that number. $11,000, in his world, was what Sharon spent on a handbag. It was 2 months of haircut fees from that flashy stylist Antoine. It was one day's flower bill at the Beverly Hills house. But in Ray Delgado's world, it was the price of 22 years, a lifetime, a family. "You mentioned your wife," Ozzy said softly, "and your daughter." Ray set down his razor and picked up a towel. He spoke while wiping Ozzy's neck. "My wife Elena works at a laundromat, double shifts. My son Miguel, he's 14, good kid, wants to go to college. And my daughter Sophia." He stopped again. A longer pause this time. He cleaned the scissors, folded the towel, just to keep his hands from being idle. "Sophia's 17. She got a scholarship to a music school. Full ride, vocal performance. The girl can sing, sir. I mean really sing. But the school's in New York and we can't afford the living expenses. Dorms, food, books. So she deferred. Said she'd wait a year, maybe 2. Help out at the shop." Ozzy closed his eyes. In 68 years of life, he'd heard a great many stories. Letters from millions of fans, people crying backstage, strangers approaching him on the street saying, "You saved my life." But Ray's story was different, because he was telling things he couldn't tell anyone else to a stranger whose hair he was cutting, without knowing who the man in front of him was. This was one of those rare moments in Ozzy's life, a raw, real human connection that hadn't passed through the filter of fame. "She sounds talented," Ozzy said. Talented. For the first time, an expression of pride settled on Ray's face, like the first light he'd seen that morning. "Sir, when that girl sings, the whole block goes quiet. Last Christmas she sang Ave Maria at the church down the street. The priest cried. The priest." Ray lifted the cape from Ozzy's shoulders and gave it a gentle shake. Hair clippings fell to the floor. "Anyway, sorry for dumping all this on you. You came in for a haircut, not a therapy session." A forced smile. "That'll be $18. Ozzy stood up and looked at himself in the mirror. His hair looked great. Simple, natural, exactly what he wanted. A better result than Antoine's 3-hour sessions, for $18 in 20 minutes. He pulled his wallet from his pocket, but just as he was about to take out the money, Cody couldn't take it anymore. He sprang from the waiting chair, face bright red. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry, man, I tried, but I can't." Ray looked at the young man in bewilderment. "You okay, brother?" Cody turned to Ozzy. "Sir, can I? Please?" Ozzy thought for a moment. Then that familiar, crooked smile appeared on his face. He shrugged. Cody turned to Ray, and words poured from his mouth like a flood. "Dude, Do you have any idea who you've been cutting hair for? Do you have any idea whose head you've been touching for the last 20 minutes? Ray frowned. Cody continued. Ray, this is Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath, the Bat, the Prince of Darkness. The guy you've been telling stories about for the last 20 minutes is sitting in your chair. Silence. Complete, absolute, suffocating silence. Even the music on the radio seemed to have stopped. In reality, AC/DC's Back in Black was playing, but nobody's ears were in any state to hear it. A series of expressions passed across Ray's face. Shock, disbelief, fear, shame, and then, completely unexpected, laughter. Deep, genuine laughter, drowning in tears. No way, he said, shaking his head. No way, you're messing with me. Ozzy took off his sunglasses, slowly, theatrically. He looked straight into Ray's eyes. I'm afraid he's not messing with you, Ray, he said. And for the record, I never released 300 doves, but I wish I had. It's a bloody good story. Ray's knees gave out. He grabbed the edge of the barber chair. His face had gone completely white. Oh my God, I told Ozzy Osbourne that Ozzy Osbourne is crazy. Ozzy laughed. A real, deep laugh from the pit of his stomach. Mate, I am crazy. You weren't wrong about that. Ray was still clinging to the edge of the chair, one hand clamped over his mouth. Sir, the things I said, the bat, the doves, the mutant thing, I'm so sorry. Ozzy held up his hand. Ray, don't apologize. That was the best 20 minutes I've had in years. Do you know how long it's been since someone talked to me like a normal person? Everyone either wants something from me or they're too scared to say a word. You just talk to me like I was a bloke who walked in off the street, because that's exactly what I am. Ozzy pulled a checkbook from his wallet. He gripped the pen with his Parkinson's trembling hands. Ray's eyes drifted to the checkbook, but he couldn't yet grasp what was happening. Ozzy wrote, slowly, carefully, in trembling letters. Then he tore the check out and held it out to Ray. This is for the haircut, he said, and for the conversation, and for Sophia's music school, and for keeping this shop open. Ray looked at the check. His lips moved as he read the number written on it, but no sound came out. $50,000. When Ray lifted his head, his eyes were bright red. Sir, I can't. This is... You can and you will, Ozzy said, his voice calm but firm. Your daughter can sing. You said the priest cried. Well, I've made a lot of priests cry in my life, but for very different reasons. Cody was crying quietly in a corner, not even daring to film on his phone. Ray just stood there, the check in one hand and the scissors he'd cut Ozzy's hair with in the other, standing at the head of a barber chair where he'd spent 22 years, living the longest and shortest moment of his life. Ozzy pulled the Dodgers cap back onto his head and put on his sunglasses. As he walked to the door, he stopped, took a business card from his pocket, and left it on the counter. One more thing. When Sophia's ready, have her call this number. It's my manager's direct line. Tell her to sing Changes for them. If she's half as good as you say, I'll make sure she gets heard. But the story didn't end there. 6 months later, in a small flat near Juilliard in New York, a 17-year-old girl was getting ready for her first day. Ray Delgado had finally used her music school scholarship. Her father, Ray, had paid the shop's rent, fixed the neon R, and replaced the leather on the second chair. His wife, Elena, no longer worked double shifts. On the morning an $18 haircut turned into a $50,000 check, Ray Delgado met the greatest legend in rock history in a barber's chair. But Ozzy Osbourne met something too that morning. Himself. The boy from Birmingham who grew up in factory dust and fell asleep to his mother's church hymns.